I thought about getting one of these Pokemon. It was back when I was expanding my farm as I was getting this field enclosure set up and was making the barrier fields big enough to support everything I was raising. I knew I was going to need some Pokemon's help with the fields, and I looked at all the horse Pokemon, debating which one I was going to go with. In the end, I decided to go with Landslide my Mudsdale, but I still remember being sorely tempted to get a Rapidash. Those fiery manes and the elegance they have when they run, it was really tempting. But Ponyta and Rapidash weren't right for the job that I was looking at. They aren't plowing or hauling Pokemon, they're more racing and contest Pokemon. And for many people, that's exactly what they're looking for. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Pokemon Care Guides, where we go through how you would raise and care for different Pokemon species in your own home. Today, we'll be talking about the fiery-maned Pokemon Ponyta and its evolution Rapidash. Ponyta is a 3-foot-tall equine Pokemon with a cream-colored coat, large brown eyes, and the iconic red mane of flames that goes from the head of the Pokemon down its back and forming the tail. It also has small tufts of flame at each elbow of its leg. Ponyta is relatively small, like I said, standing 3 foot 3 inches tall and weighing only about 66 pounds. In all, not that complex of a body shape, and the evolution Rapidash doesn't change very much. Sure, it's bigger, standing 5 foot 7 inches tall at the shoulder, and being a surprisingly light weight of 209 pounds. Aside from the increase in size, the only changes that Rapidash has made is that the mane of fire is now much wilder, flaring out behind the Pokemon, especially as it runs. Its eyes have also now changed from brown to a burning red, and in the center of its forehead, a long horn has grown, reminiscent of its Galarian forms. And that's really it. Like I said, these guys aren't that complex in their body shape, but are they complex in their care? Well, let's get into it and find out if these Pokemon are the perfect Pokemon partners for you. Enclosure. The enclosure for these Pokemon is going to be relatively easy and simple compared to a few other enclosures that we've gone over in the past. Thanks to their biology as grazing grassland Pokemon, all they really need is a grass field that they can graze the grass from. Now, mind you, that doesn't mean that you can just let them roam in your backyard. For one thing, they need at least 3 acres of field to feel comfortable, and that 3 acres must be divided into 3 different paddocks. I'm sure that you, just like I did when I first found out this information, are asking, why do you need to divide it into 3 separate paddocks? Why not just let them wander the entire 3 acres? Well, it's because of their grazing feeding method. If you allow them to wander the entire field all at once, they'll never allow the grass to grow up very high, leading to it having less nutrition overall for them. This is why in the wilds you see the herds of these Pokemon are migratory, as they're constantly looking for new patches of better tastier grass. Now, of course, you aren't just letting your Ponyta or Rapidash wander wherever they want to feed on whatever grass they want. Pokemon don't respect borders, and they will end up eating your neighbor's yard. But you also don't want them to just wander the full 3 acres, as that'll leave the entire thing without a chance to grow. Hence, the 3 different paddocks, allowing them to still wander and graze, while allowing the other 2 paddocks that they aren't in time to grow. Each paddock should then be surrounded by a fence that denotes the boundaries of the paddock. Mind you, the fence is going to have to be rather large, considering the jumping strength of these Pokemon. Ponyta have been recorded jumping as high as 12 feet in the air, so you're going to need a fence that's at least that high up. It should be constructed of wooden beams, carefully made in such a way that they won't be able to slip through and get out. And I can already hear plenty of you. Why use wood for a fire type? Well, for multiple reasons. Chain link is harder to see over longer distance, and these Pokemon love to run. If these Pokemon get a good head of steam going and don't realize that they need to stop because the fence is harder for them to see, then they might not be able to stop in time and crash into it, hurting themselves. If it's a wooden fence, then not only is it easier for them to see over long distances, but if they don't have time to stop, then they can still use their fire to avoid getting hurt. Sure, it'll be a pain to have to fix the pen and recapture your loose Pokemon, but it's better than them hurting themselves. And lastly is because this line has the intriguing ability to make it so that their flames only burn when they want them to. This is why you can only ride a Rapidash that wants you to ride them, and what makes breaking a wild Rapidash so hard. It's very much a defense mechanism, and that means that they aren't very likely to go around using it on their enclosure or the fencing unless they feel that they have to. So, now you have the fencing, and now you have the paddocks. Now you need to get them some shelter. I'm sure many of you are thinking of getting a stall, which, after speaking with a few professionals that routinely work with these Pokemon, such as Bex from the Fire Pokemon Sanctuary, I've learned that those aren't strictly necessary. Really, what stalls are good for are for isolation. If one of your Pokemon is sick, or they're getting bullied by some of the other Pokemon, or you have some really nasty weather coming through, then yeah, they can be very helpful. And a stall is just a small space with a sliding door that has a spot for them to eat, drink, and relax. People with large amounts of these Pokemon often have large barns full of stalls just to house all of them. But, like I said, a stall isn't totally needed. Equine Pokemon, especially Ponyta and Rapidash, love open space, and are completely fine with being out in their fields all the time. Instead of a stall for them, you can get what's known as a run-in shed. This is a structure that's almost like the awning that I described for the Geodude guide. Oftentimes, it's a structure with a roof and 3 walls that's just large enough for your equine Pokemon to run underneath for multiple different reasons, be it to escape the weather, to take a nap, or to eat and drink. You need to be sure that the structure is deep enough to accommodate all of your Pokemon underneath at once, and to provide them escape from bad weather, especially in rain that might be blowing hard enough to come underneath. You should also provide them with some sort of soft bedding underneath the run-in shed, like sawdust, wood chips, or straw. And, same as with the fence, you shouldn't have to worry about them being set on fire, since these Pokemon are not likely to burn down their home on a whim. And the last thing you'll need under the run-in shed will be the water trough and a dry space for their food. The food spot is simple, just pick a spot that won't get wet. But the water trough, you need to be sure to get one that's large enough for the Pokemon you have. Each Ponyta will drink about 5 gallons of water a day, and Rapidash, depending on how much it moves around throughout the day, could drink anywhere between 8 to 18 gallons per day. If you get a trough that's too small, your Pokemon could become sick and they won't be happy with you. The last thing we're going to talk about with the enclosure is going to be what other Pokemon can be housed with them. Of course, the thing that I'm sure many of you are thinking is that they can be housed with each other, and that is true to an extent. Females can readily be housed with each other, and actually the enclosure setup that I've laid out for you here can house between 5 to 6 Ponyta and around 2 to 3 Rapidash per paddock. So you could easily have a bunch of females together. Males will only get along with each other though if there are no females around, and even then it's iffy. They may still decide to kick, bite, and even use their horns and fire on each other as a show of dominance. And if you introduce a female to the equation, then it'll get even worse. So if you're gonna have a male of the Ponyta line, then be sure that he is with only females or only males. As for other Pokemon, the Mudspray line is a good choice, though you have to be careful because the gender rules still apply, and a male Mudsdale will be able to really harm any Rapidash that it doesn't like. As well, other common farm-like animals like the Miltank line or the Go-Goat line would do okay with these Pokemon. Avoid the Tauros line as they can be very aggressive, and any swine-like Pokemon, like the Spoink line and the Tepig lines, as they can end up getting a taste for meat, and equines like the Ponyta line won't really put up with them. Really, keep anything that looks like a predator away from this line, even other household Pokemon like the Meowth line or the Growlithe line. The only times that they interact well with those kinds of Pokemon are only if they have been very well trained and they have been well conditioned over a long period of time to be used to them. And even then, they can still be somewhat skittish. I'm certain that I've missed a few Pokemon in this explanation, but in general, these Pokemon will do okay with most herbivorous prey Pokemon. Just remember that any enclosure that I describe for you in these guides are only built to handle the Pokemon that the guide is about. Sure, these paddocks can hold multiples of the Ponyta line at once, but always be sure to expand and accommodate any other Pokemon that you intend to house with them. Availability. Despite, and possibly because of, the popularity of this Pokemon line in the horse world, they really aren't that available in the wild. As well, the wild populations that are out there frequent places that no novice trainer or simple enthusiast should be going. Places like Mount Ember in the Sevi Islands and Mount Silver between Kanto and Johto. The easiest place that you're going to find these Pokemon is going to be the Sinnoh region, as most of the northern routes have a decent population of these Pokemon, despite the heavy rain that they can sometimes get. As well, the few routes between Kanto and Johto regions around Mount Silver and the Indigo Plateau do have a significant population. There may also be a small population of them in Unova, just outside Lakanosa town, but if they are there, it's a very small population that may be very hard to find. And aside from that, there's really nothing from these Pokemon out there, which makes the breeding scene for these Pokemon immense. Thanks to the beauty of these Pokemon and the fact that they are used in races and shows and competitions, there are tons of people that breed and sell just these Pokemon. Their popularity is so high that even if you couldn't house a bunch of them together and the feeding wasn't so simple, there would still be a surplus of them on the market. These Pokemon tend to beat out any other kind of equine in popularity. If you want a Ponyta or a Rapidash, then you will have no trouble finding them at all. Just be sure you're ready to part with some serious money, because when it comes to these Pokemon, common does not mean cheap. Catchability. I'm going to be honest here. The best chance you have of catching one of these Pokemon is if you already have one of these Pokemon. The two major things that are going to make these Pokemon hard to catch is the fact that they often travel in herds and their speed. The herd thing is going to make it tough because sneaking close enough to a Pokemon to catch it in a Pokeball is tough most times. With these Pokemon, you're not only trying to sneak up on one of them, but an entire herd. And if one of them sees you and starts running, you better bet they're all going to start running. Which brings us to their speed. Because once they start running, good luck catching them. These Pokemon are blisteringly fast, with the fastest Rapidash being clocked at a max speed of 150 miles an hour, which ironically means the best way to catch up with and catch one of these Pokemon is with one of these Pokemon. By riding your own Rapidash, you'll be able to catch up to one of the herd and catch them rather easily. But that means you already have to have a Rapidash, so you're just catching a second one. Not to mention that by going after a wild one, you'll have to most likely go to a rocky and mountainous area that really inexperienced trainers should not be going to. And by getting a wild one, you're going to have to put a lot more effort into the training and breaking of that Pokemon. In all, even in the best circumstances, these are not the easiest Pokemon to catch. But if you are determined to catch your own wild Pokemon, then I would suggest Pokeballs or Great Balls for Ponyta and 100% Ultra Balls for Rapidash. Care. Let's talk about food first, as it's probably going to be the simplest and shortest part of this section. So, of course, in warmer times or in warmer climates, then these guys can just eat the grass in their paddocks. After all, they are grazers, and that is their main way of getting nutrients in the wild. However, if you live in a place that gets cold at any point during the year and the grass stops growing, then you will have to provide them with hay. Not straw, which is what we used for the bedding, but the greener, leafier hay. Get them a bale and place it inside their run-in shed or their stall, and they should munch on it as the day goes on. In general, a Ponyta will eat about 3/4 of a bale a day, with Rapidash eating twice that. Feeding time wise, like I said, these Pokemon are grazers and need constant access to food. So check on them throughout the day, and if you notice that the food amount is getting low, then just head out and replace it. On top of the hay or grass, there are also supplemental nutritional things that you can give them that'll provide them with some extra nutrients, vitamins, and minerals to help their health. Things like grains and oils for complex carbs, and fats that can be hard to get from just grass or hay. The amount to give them can differ depending on how active the Pokemon is, but the normal is to feed them this stuff once or twice a day, giving Rapidash 5 quarts over the course of the day, and Ponyta getting half of that. Like I said, this depends on how active your Pokemon is, so keep an eye on their weight as the days go by. If they start to put on an excess amount of weight or they start to lose too much weight, then adjust the supplements accordingly. The last thing that's related to food that I wanted to mention is the difference between wild and breeder-raised Pokemon. As I mentioned in the availability and catchability sections, the wild populations live in mountainous regions, where the grass that they find is sparse and tough, holding a lot less sugar than lowland varieties. Because of this, the wild populations of Ponyta and Rapidash have evolved to be less tolerant of sugars and more tolerant of a diet of tough legumes like hay. This isn't the case with the breeders that have had generations of these Pokemon feeding on the sweet lowland grass, so they've adapted to be able to handle the higher sugar content. All this is to say that if you end up getting a wild-caught one of these Pokemon, keep an eye on how much grass you allow them to eat. The higher sugar content could cause them to become very sick. You may have to remove some of the grass from the paddocks and provide them more hay to eat all year round, even if you live in a warmer climate. Alright, let's get to the interaction between you and the Pokemon, because the main reason that people want these Pokemon is to be able to ride them. Well, first things first, do not ride a Ponyta. Even if you're planning on only putting a small child on them, don't do it. Ponyta are small and still developing and growing, hence the evolution into a Rapidash. Their bodies are just not strong enough to handle the weight of a person of any size on their back. Only Rapidash can be ridden. Now, that's not to say you can't start training your Ponyta for riding before it evolves. In fact, that's the best way to do it. Start with a Ponyta and get it used to doing everything except for carrying your weight. That way, once it evolves, then you don't have much left to do and you're not trying to work with a fully grown, powerful Pokemon. The other thing to consider is that this will be much easier with a breeder-raised Pokemon than a wild one. These Pokemon can be very spirited and stubborn, so training might not take that well. You have to be willing to put up with the animal not listening to you and being able to control an animal that doesn't want to be near you. Getting one from a Ponyta breeder means that they at least will be used to having humans around, if not working with humans. But for those of you that want a wild-caught Ponyta, let's start from the beginning. Right after catching your Pokemon, you want to get them used to their enclosure, allowing them to get used to the space, understanding that this is their new home that they're safe in. During this time, they may be very skittish towards you, and that's okay. What you're going to do is set a routine. Equine Pokemon like Ponyta and Rapidash love their routines when in captivity, so when you bring the food out every day, do it at the same times every day. Same with the water. This repetition every day will help them feel more settled into their enclosure and, more importantly, more settled around you. Then, once the routine is set and they're getting into it, start by just getting closer. Just a little bit every day. Start by being 20 steps away, and then 19 the next day, and so on. There will be days where you aren't able to get closer than the previous one. It's not going to just be a smooth increase. But over time, the bond between you will start to strengthen and you'll be able to get closer and closer. Once you get within touching distance, this is where you need to be careful. Ponyta and Rapidash are, obviously, covered in fire. And while that won't be a concern for you later on, once you have a good strong bond with them, for now that bond is still new, and that fire will most likely be very hot. So you're going to need to get some protection from that heat. To this end, you're going to need to get one of those fireproof suits. You know, the full body ones that are all metallic and shiny. But don't just put it on and approach your Pokemon. They won't recognize you in the suit if you do that. So you'll have to slowly get them used to the suit and get them to recognize that it's you inside of it. You can do this by keeping to the routine you've established, but by maybe leaving the hood off the suit so the Pokemon can see it's you, or by putting it on in front of them so they can make the connection that you're inside of it. The end goal of this is that you're able to approach the Pokemon in or out of the suit without them freaking out. With this protection on, start physically interacting with the Pokemon. Petting them, brushing them, even feeding them treats and food from your palm will go a long way to deepening the shallow bond that you formed. Also, include at this point the things that'll have to be done to maintain the health of these Pokemon. I'll talk more about the things you'll have to do after the training section, but for now, just be sure to do things like picking up their feet one at a time, checking their teeth, and touching their ears. It'll get them used to it and make it easier for the people that are actually going to be doing the maintenance later on when they have to. And now is when you introduce the saddle and the bridle. Just like everything else, this is going to be done slowly. Start by just putting them in the same space as your Pokemon. Let them inspect them, get to know them before you even try to put them on them. Then move to just draping them on their body. Don't put the saddle on or put the bridle on, just set them on your Pokemon. Your Ponyta or Rapidash is probably not going to like it and shake them off, but this is a persistence game. Keep trying, and reward your Pokemon with treats for any amount of time that it tolerates the saddle or bridle being on them. Once your Pokemon gets to a point where they're used to the equipment being rested on them, that's when you actually strap the equipment down. They may like this even less and try to buck and shake the equipment off, or they may not. If they do, then just let them tire themselves out. Don't take the equipment off, as they have to get used to them if you want any chance of being able to ride them in the future. After you've done these steps a few times and your Pokemon is settled when you strap the saddle down, that's the end of the training for Ponyta. Remember, Ponyta is only 3 feet tall at the shoulder and weighs less than 100 pounds. They are not built for riding, even for small children. I have to reiterate this because it is a common thing for people to get Ponytas for their children and it ends up hurting the animal. Trying to do that will only cause harm to your Pokemon's body and make them less inclined to allow anyone to ride them later on. Once your Ponyta is used to having the saddle on, then you want to lead them around with the lead and get them used to just moving with the saddle. Once they evolve into a Rapidash and get settled into their new body, that's when we start to introduce your weight. This is the part that'll be the slowest and the hardest, as we're fighting against their natural prey instinct of getting whatever the heck is on their back off. And remember that for this part, you should always be wearing your fire protection. They are not going to enjoy having you on their back to begin with, which means you need to protect yourself from that fire. We're going to start by slowly introducing your weight. Start by stepping into the stirrup of the saddle, then stepping out, and then repeat over and over again. And be ready for the Pokemon to shy away from you. You could easily be knocked onto your butt because the Pokemon moves while you're stepping up. Once they get used to that, then you're going to lay across the saddle, now getting them used to the weight being spread across their back. Repeat until they're used to it. Then you're going to sit in the saddle, but not move. Not yet. Once they get used to that, this is the dangerous part, and the part that I'm sure you've been thinking about ever since I've mentioned training these Pokemon. You need to hold on. As soon as you try to move while sitting on these Pokemon, they will want you off. There are a few ways that I've found that you can get through this. One is by just allowing the Pokemon to run in its enclosure while you're on it and allow it to tire itself out. This is the method that my Mudsdale was trained on, and this method usually has a lot less bucking and jumping involved. The other method includes having a circular pen set up and releasing them into it while you're on them. This obviously means a lot less running and a lot more bucking, but then you aren't worried about them running at high speed while you're on them. It's really a matter of preference whichever you decide to go with, but you should always have another person nearby with the Pokemon's Pokeball at the ready, and also ready to call an ambulance if you take a hard spill from the Pokemon. No matter which way you do this, it'll not be over in just one attempt. You're gonna have to do this over and over and over and over and over again. This part is the reason that I said this training will take a long time to do, because this part can take anywhere between months to years depending on how stubborn your Pokemon is. If you're going to do this, then you need to make sure that you have the patience and consistency to stick with it. But after all that work, you will end up having an amazing looking Pokemon that you can ride and really interact with, unlike some of the others that we've talked about in this series. You can even remove the fire protection after the Pokemon becomes comfortable with you on its back, as the flames won't burn you thanks to the bond you've built with the Pokemon. And that's not even the end of the training if you don't want it to be. There are so many other things that you can do with these Pokemon beyond just riding, like agility competitions and shows and races and handling competitions and so many more. The only thing that I do have to add here is, even if you don't choose to do something besides riding your Pokemon, you have to keep up with it consistently. Because if you go a long time between riding sessions, then these Pokemon can actually regress in their training, and you'll have to do some parts all over again, which would be a major pain for anyone. Whew. Okay, training is done. Now the last thing that we're going to talk about is the maintenance that you have to do for the Pokemon's health. And honestly, this isn't too bad, as you probably won't be the one doing it. It's normal for people to call a professional to handle this kind of stuff. These are things like trimming the Pokemon's hooves and putting horseshoes on them to protect their feet from damage, as that can be a major issue for these kinds of Pokemon. A dentist would also be a good idea to see these Pokemon, as their teeth can oftentimes get messed up just through normal use. So really, it's not something major for you to worry about, but you will have to get into contact with the right professionals to make these things happen. Cost. Thanks to the fact that you need not only so much land for these Pokemon, but the tall fencing and the run-in shed, it's gonna be a lot of money for the enclosure. Anytime you're dealing with things that need this much movement room at a minimum, are probably gonna cost a lot, which is why the Ponyta line is in the very high category. And so are the Pokemon themselves. The price from a breeder can vary somewhat depending on if you get a Ponyta or a Rapidash and how well trained they are when you get them. After all, an untrained Ponyta will be much cheaper than a fully trained Rapidash, but no matter what, the enclosure cost and the care cost, along with popularity, are going to push this Pokemon themselves into the very high category. And lastly is the food/maintenance cost. The food itself isn't that bad, with hay being relatively simple to get, and if you live in a place that's warm all year round, then this could be even cheaper with them eating the grass. But really, where the money's going to be coming from here are the supplements in their food and the professionals coming in to take care of the horse's hooves and teeth. Altogether, it's going to be in the high or maybe even the very high category. Conclusion. These Pokemon are gorgeous, and it's easy to see why they're a favorite of so many people around the world. But don't let yourself be blinded by that popularity. To really care for and raise these Pokemon takes a lot of effort, and if you can't put that in, then I would recommend moving on to something else. That's the reason that I had Landslide, my Mudsdale, pre-trained when I got him, and I ride and use him every day for farm work. They can be a lot of effort and a lot of money as well, but they can make great intermediate Pokemon for someone because they're not that complex once the training is done. If you're looking for something that'll test your carrying ability and that you can really interact with without making your entire life about them, then I would say that these are the perfect Pokemon partner for you. Thank you all for listening, and please join us again next time when we go over the dopey, slow-moving Pokemon Slowpoke and its evolutions Slowbro and Slowking. Have a wonderful night, everyone. I can't really believe that I have to say this, but evolution is permanent. It's not something that can be reversed. It involves a fundamental change in the Pokemon's biology. You can no more reverse it than you can uncook pasta. So the amount of information that I found online when I was researching this Pokemon, saying that if you just pulled the Shelder off the evolved forms, it'll just go back to being a Slowpoke, was frankly concerning. Do not do that. The Shelder and the Slowpoke evolve together to form a symbiotic entity. Removing one from the other in an attempt to de-evolve them will simply result in a quite frankly fatal injury to both. Their biological systems are now intertwined. They don't separate. Slowbro and Slowking need the Shelder's venom for their neurological systems to function, and the Shelder has specialized to only take nutrients from Slowbro's tail or Slowking's head. Without them, it will starve. Thankfully, this is the kind of misinformation that I made these guides to correct. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Pokemon Care Guides, where we go through how you would raise and care for different Pokemon species in your own home. As I'm sure you can tell from the intro, today we'll be talking about the lethargic, slow-witted Pokemon Slowpoke and its evolutions Slowbro and Slowking. Slowpoke itself is a medium-sized Pokemon, being about 4 feet long and weighing an average of about 80 pounds. It has a primarily pink body, and I mean bubblegum pink. Its ears are small and curled, and it has a cream-colored mouth, along with short, stubby legs that end in 1 claw each. It also has a long tail that it uses to try and hunt prey, and 2 very vacant eyes. Overall, these guys are very cute. I love them. I was actually thinking of adding these guys to my breeding program just because I love Slowpoke's dopey faces and slow mannerisms. Slowpoke is also interesting in that it doesn't evolve on its own, only evolving when it establishes a symbiotic relationship with the Pokemon Shelder. Depending on where this Pokemon is bitten by the Shelder, it can lead to 2 separate evolutions. The more common of the 2 evolutions is Slowbro, which looks very similar to a Slowpoke that's just simply standing on its hind legs. This similarity is the main reason for all the incorrect information out there about removing the Shelder and de-evolving your Pokemon. The Shelder, though, looks very different, changing to have more of a spiral shell look, so that it can better hold on to the Slowbro's tail. Thanks to standing up and the added weight of the Shelder's shell, Slowbro now stands 5 foot 3 inches tall and weighs around 173 pounds on average. However, if the Shelder bites the Slowpoke's head instead of the Slowpoke's tail, then it'll instead evolve into Slowking, a version of this Pokemon line that is much more active and intelligent. Slowking's body looks the same as Slowbro's, but instead of the spiral shelter being on its tail, it's now placed atop the Pokemon's head like a crown, covering the head down to the eyes. This does mean that the Pokemon is technically taller than its other evolutions, standing 6 foot 7 inches tall. Though it doesn't weigh much more than Slowbro, being an average of 175 pounds. As well, they've evolved a white and red frill around their neck, looking very much like some fancy clothing. And, thanks to the stimulating venom from the shelter now being directly injected into the brain, these Pokemon are much more intelligent than the others in their evolutionary line. A Slowbro gets a bit of this effect, but the fact that the venom needs to travel from the tail, up the spine, to the brain means that it has a lessened effect, only boosting the Pokemon's psychic abilities, whereas Slowking's intelligence and psychic power are both increased. It makes raising these Pokemon interesting and varied based on which of the evolutions you have. If that sounds good to you, then let's get into the guide and find out if these are the perfect Pokemon partners for you. Enclosure. This one is going to be very simple, thanks to the fact that 2 out of 3 evolutions are so sedentary and slow, and the 3rd evolution is so smart. The main thing that all of the evolutions are going to need is going to be a water source. Normally, with terrestrial water-type Pokemon, I would recommend a pool over something like a pond, as it's easier to take care of and leads to less of a muddy mess in your yard. The problem with that is that these Pokemon actually need that muddy mess. Thanks to these Pokemon having no fur, their pink skin can easily get burned as they sit along the sides of the water or as they're swimming. To combat this, they use the mud created along the edges and the bottoms of the pond. It acts to keep the sun off them, and they don't have to move if the mud is constantly being soaked by the pond. And as I'm sure you all know, the waters of a pond aren't usually crystal clear. It's often muddy and murky, only allowing a little bit of light to penetrate the water. So having a concrete pool where there's no mud or muddy water won't work, because then your Pokemon can end up getting burned from the sun. Meaning you'll need to have a pond installed. Thankfully, it doesn't have to be that deep or that large, only have to be deep enough for your Pokemon to swim around some. The best dimensions that I found for a pond seem to be having it be about 20 to 25 feet in diameter and being at least twice the largest Pokemon's height. So if you're only going to have Slowpoke, then you only need to have it be about 8 feet deep. The Slowbro will need about a 10 foot deep pond, and Slowking will need a 12 foot deep pond. As well, you should add in a way to keep the water from becoming too stagnant, as that can lead to algae or bacteria growing in the water. Look for one of those fountains that places get for their lakes and ponds, the ones that shoot water into the air. They help to keep the water somewhat moving and also aerate the water as well, allowing any aquatic plants or Pokemon to be healthier and happier. Overall, not that bad, though it can be a lot if you don't have something like that already on your property. Aside from the water, they will need some dry land that they can rest on, but honestly, they don't need that much room. Thanks to these Pokemon's notorious laziness, they don't move around very much, if at all. Seriously, I found reports of Slowpokes that'll stay in the same comfy spot for days, to the point where their trainers had to go out and check on them to see if they were okay. You really don't have to worry about getting these guys much land to walk around on. Maybe give them some space equivalent to 100, maybe 150 square feet of dry land to move around on. The only exception to this would be Slowking, as it's slightly more active than its evolutionary brothers. So for that Pokemon, increase the size of the enclosure to 250 square feet of dry land. Though, I should say that Slowking itself is so intelligent and unaggressive that it would be perfectly acceptable to house it in your home. I mean, I really haven't done a good job of explaining to you just how intelligent these Pokemon really are. It has been well documented that Slowkings are very intuitive and will learn from their surroundings. They can solve complex problems if given enough time, they've been known to pick up simple human mannerisms, and have even been shown to develop their own primitive language, though it's unintelligible to humans. We've only really seen this level of intelligence in the Alakazam line in the series so far, and as shown with that line, Pokemon that have this level of intelligence make great household pets, and you can easily teach them how to behave. So sure, you could keep your Slowking outside, but you could just as easily have it in the house with you, which I'm sure many owners would prefer to have their Pokemon closer to them. And really the last thing regarding an enclosure for these guys is shelter. This is just going to be a sort of resting spot for them to sleep in if they want it. The rain won't bother them unless it's an exceptionally heavy thunderstorm or worse. The heat also won't really be an issue as they're water types. If they get overheated, they can just go into the pond or sit in the mud. Really, the biggest thing is going to be if it gets cold out, as they don't really have a defense mechanism for that. The best thing to provide them is a decently sized Pokemon house that has a heated or insulated element to it, whether that be a heating pad, a heat lamp, or just a regular heater. Aside from that, you should also provide them enough room to sleep, and if you do get some really cold weather, enough room for them to move around slightly and to eat and drink. You're looking at something that's maybe 8 by 8 feet for Slowpoke and 10 by 10 feet for Slowbro. Slowking, as we've said, would do best if you kept it in your home with you, so providing them with a comfy place to sleep, eat, and drink shouldn't be too hard for you in that regard. When it comes to other Pokemon that can be housed with this line, you're going to want to get things that aren't aggressive or territorial. Slowpoke and Slowbro are really not smart enough to really notice or dislike other Pokemon being in their space, so it'll come down to if the other Pokemon has a problem with your Slowpoke evolution. So anything aggressive is going to be a no-go. As well, you might want to avoid electric types with Slowpoke's water typing. That can cause some issues with electrical discharge even if the two Pokemon are getting along. Grass types might also be a bad idea, as your dim-witted Slowpoke might try to make a meal out of them without realizing they're another Pokemon. In the same vein, you should be careful what other Pokemon you're going to put in the pond if you decide to put any in there at all. Slowpoke, strangely enough, is an omnivore, meaning they do eat meat, which just feels weird, and they will either use their tail to catch prey, kind of like a fishing lure, or just get in the water and use their psychic abilities to catch prey when it comes to the later evolutions. So any fish-like Pokemon that you put in there might end up becoming lunch. As well, any predatory Pokemon might end up making your Slowpoke evolution into lunch. After all, they're not that hard to catch. Things like the Poliwag line would be good to house with these guys, as those aren't the kind of prey that Slowpoke goes for. And even if the Poliwag does end up getting caught by your Slowpoke, they can handle being on land just fine. And of course, if you house the Shelter line with your Slowpoke, not only will the Shelter end up as prey, you're guaranteed to eventually evolve your Pokemon. So when it comes to housing other Pokemon with these guys, really use your discretion. Availability. When it comes to these Pokemon, you're going to want to focus on the water, as they are oftentimes found along the edges of lakes, rivers, and oceans. They practically infest the waters of the Kanto region, almost like the Tentacle line does, though to a slightly lesser extent. Seriously, if you go into the water, there's a good chance you'll find them, especially if you go around Celadon City and the Seafoam Islands. As well, they can be found in all 4 provinces of Paldea, they can be found in most of Paldea, excluding the Great Crater. Outside of those 2 major exceptions, this species tends to congregate in 1 or 2 major sections of a region, which I chalk up to their slow and sedentary nature. Places like the Slowpoke Well in Johto, Routes 1, 15, 16, and Kale Bay in Alola, and very rarely Route 205 in Sinnoh, which is the one I live on, closer to Eterna City. I wouldn't count on finding one here, though. I've lived here for years and haven't seen one of them, so your odds of finding one out of the blue are pretty low. There are also a few other places out there, but the main point is that as long as you don't live in the Hoenn region, there should be a population native to your region. The only member of this line that's more rare than the others is Slowking, as it's much less common for a Slowpoke to go full body swimming where the shelter can get its head, when it can just instead use its tail for fishing. And when it comes to the breeding industry, I mean, there are certainly people out there that like to raise these Pokemon as I would, as they do have a certain charm to them. But it isn't the most popular Pokemon out there. Like, you wouldn't be able to live off just raising Slowpokes. But the fact that they are so easy to raise, and you're able to control their evolutions by controlling their exposure to shelter, does make them a great beginner Pokemon, and it does mean that people have raised and sold them just out of sheer fondness. I mean, that's why I've been considering raising and selling them. I love these guys. And I'm not the only one out there that thinks that way. So if you want to get a Slowpoke, you might have to do some searching for somebody, but it wouldn't be an impossible task. Catchability. Do you really have to ask? These guys are extremely easy to catch. Slowpoke is so slow-witted that it takes 5 seconds to even register ping. You walking up and throwing a Pokeball at it probably won't register at all. The only danger I can see is if you somehow manage to rile one of them up enough to start using their psychic abilities on you. But if it reaches that point, then you've been wasting time making it angry at you. With Slowpoke and Slowbro, you should be able to just walk up to them, chuck a ball at them from close distance, and walk away. I'm gonna say that you should still bring a Pokemon with you to protect you just in case, but really, you shouldn't need it. Pokeballs for Slowpoke and Great Balls and Ultra Balls for Slowbro should do just fine. The only one that doesn't fit with this trend is Slowking. They are still slow to move and react, but they are smart enough and have decent enough control over their psychic abilities that they could put up a decent fight or even end up outwitting you somehow. If you are going after a wild Slowking, then 1, you need to be very lucky, and 2, be sure to bring a decently strong Pokemon that's either dark, electric, or grass type to protect you. Ultra Balls should be just fine for Slowking as well. Care. For these Pokemon, the biggest things you'll have to take care of for them is their food. These Pokemon are omnivores, but they tend more toward the vegetarian side of that scale. The thing where they catch prey with their tails really only gets so much attention because it's how they evolve. But if they did that all the time, then all Slowpoke would evolve super fast, and we would have mostly Slowbros walking around. Instead, they'll graze on grass and other plants that they find along the water's edge for the majority of their food intake, and will only supplement their diet with meat once a week or so. Thankfully, their very sedentary nature means that they don't need much food at all. In fact, Slowpoke only eats about 1.25 pounds of food a day, with Slowbro and Slowking going up to about 2.5 to 3 pounds of food a day, purely because they need the nutrients to feed the shelter as well. Give them a mix of different berries, alfalfa, and a small chunk of fish, something that comes out to be like 3 ounces worth for Slowpoke, and 6 ounces for the later evolutions. And since these Pokemon are grazers, the best thing to do for them is to take all the food out at one time and just leave it out for them. However, the issue with this is that these Pokemon are so slow and kinda dumb that they might not even realize that the food is there, and it might end up going bad, especially the meat. There are a few ways to mitigate the chances of that happening. One is to always put the food in the same place. If you establish that food will always be in that one spot, then eventually your Pokemon will understand that's where they go to eat. It just might take them a while to realize that. As well, you should always feed your Pokemon at the same time, helping to further establish that routine. The best time to feed these guys is actually just before sunset, as it's a very visually distinct time for your Pokemon. The heat in the day will be going down, and there's less of a chance of them getting burned by the sun while they eat. And the last thing is that when you do feed them, do something to get their attention. Ring a bell, shout something, have an alarm go off, anything that will function to grab this Pokemon's attention and get through their thick skulls to tell them that their food is there for them. Doing this isn't a guarantee that they'll eat the food before it goes bad, but doing all of this will greatly increase the odds that they do know it's there. And if you have a Slowking, you can disregard all of this, as they're smart enough to know when the food is out for them. Speaking of Slowking, it's really the only member of this species that you have to train and work with. Slowpoke and Slowbro, you can teach them simple commands, and in battle they're decently effective. After all, multiple Elite Four trainers use them, but you need to have a lot of patience for them, and you can never give them anything too complex. The Slowking, on the other hand, is able to understand fairly complex ideas. They're very much like the Alakazam line in that their minds are their strongest muscles, and as such, you need to work with them. Once you either evolve or get your Slowking, then you should start working with it, giving it things that it can test its mind with and help to keep its intellect sharp. Things like puzzle toys, memory games, things that'll actually make the Pokemon have to work through the issue and figure out how to get to the solution that it wants. Not only will this help to keep your Pokemon sharp and more intelligent, but it will also serve to help the two of you bond closer together as you work with your Pokemon. Also, keep in mind that as your Slowking lives with you in your home, it will also begin to pick up habits and mannerisms from you. So, if you suddenly see your Pokemon trying to use silverware or the garbage can, don't be alarmed. It's just picking things up from you, kind of like a child. The last part for caring for these guys is keeping their enclosure clean. There's the normal things like cleaning up waste, but you will have to make sure that their water stays clean while also remaining dirty. Or I should say that you need to make sure their water stays sanitary while still Or I should say that you still need to make sure their water is sanitary while still having the muddy water they need to avoid sun damage. Thankfully, these Pokemon aren't as sensitive as the Poliwag line, so you can use some Pokemon-safe chemicals to keep bacteria from building up in the water. As well, since this is a pond and doesn't have any water inflow or outflow, keep an eye on the water levels. If you live in a place that does get really warm through at least part of the year, then some of the water from the pond will end up evaporating away, and if the water level drops too low, then it can end up becoming just a mud pit. Occasionally, check the water levels, and if you notice them getting low, then be sure to add some more back in. You should also keep an eye on the water fountain that's in the center of the lake. They can end up getting gunked up with stuff from the pond, like algae or the dirt in the water. Every now and then, you might have to take it out of the pond and clean it out, or replace it if it gets bad enough. Overall, not terrible, but it is an important part of your enclosure. And yeah, that's pretty much it for the care for these guys. They are a lovely, simple evolutionary line that doesn't take any major care requirements. Cost. Food for these guys will be pretty cheap. Alfalfa is very cheap to get a hold of, as are the different veggies and berries that you'll need to be mixed into these Pokemon's meals. The most expensive part, as ever, is going to be the meat, but they eat so little of it that it brings the cost down. And then you could even grow your own food, which would bring the cost of this down even more. In the end, you're looking at the very low to the low category for the food per month. The Pokemon themselves won't be that bad either. Really, if you have the ability to get to where there is a wild population of these guys, then it can be as cheap as the price of a Pokeball. But if you want to get a breeder-raised one, then that will probably be in the low category. Of course, Slowbro and Slowking will be more expensive, as that means the breeder will have to either get a shelter themselves, or put the work in to raise the shelters. Either way, that means that the evolutions will be between moderate and high categories, which I think is fine since they had to put the work in for 2 Pokemon for you just to get 1. And last is going to be the enclosure. Unless you plan on digging the pond by hand with a shovel, which could take weeks, you'll need to rent the machinery to dig it. Renting just that itself will be in the moderate category. Then you add in the water that you'll need to fill the pond, the fountain in the middle, the chemicals to keep it clean, the shelter that the Pokemon will need. Then you add in the water that you'll need to fill the pond, the fountain in the middle, the chemicals to keep it clean, the shelter the Pokemon will need. It's probably going to be in the high category, which honestly is less than I expected. Conclusion. I love these guys. I've always liked them because of their dumb, dopey faces and how slow-witted they are, but after doing this research, that love has only gotten stronger. I mean, they have very, very few downsides. They get along with almost anything else, they're simple to care for, they're not that expensive once you get the enclosure set up, and you can control their evolutions as if they were stone evolutions. So, no forced random enclosure upgrades. Really, the only downside that I can see is if you don't have the patience to deal with something that's just going to stare at you with a vacant look in its eyes, and that the food will occasionally go bad because they forgot to eat it. In my personal opinion, I think that these would be great Pokemon for beginners or young kids, and it's a fantastic introduction to water-type Pokemon overall. So if you're looking for something simple and easygoing, then this very well could be the perfect Pokemon partners for you. Thank you all for listening, and please join us again next time where we cover the magnetic metal Pokemon, Magnemite and its evolutions Magneton and Magnezone. Have a wonderful night, everyone. It's pretty easy to understand the Pokemon that are the most like us. The ones that are mammals, the ones that eat like us, the ones that have biological functions that we recognize. Even if you don't know the specifics of how to care for and raise them, you can make a few general guesses. You know they'll need food and water. You know that extreme temperatures probably aren't going to be good for them. You know that they do best in a specific natural environment. Which is what makes interacting with and raising Pokemon like Magnemite and its evolutions so confusing and intriguing. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Pokemon Care Guides, where we go through how you would raise and care for different Pokemon species in your own home. Today, we'll be talking about the electrical magnet Pokemon Magnemite and its evolutions Magneton and Magnezone. Magnemite is a very unique looking Pokemon. It's a foot tall and weighs only 13 pounds, despite its body being made of metal. The center mass of the Pokemon is a metal sphere that has one large eye on it with no iris, just a small pupil in the center. On either side of the sphere are large magnets with their ends colored red and blue, corresponding to the positive and negatively charged sides. Think of the plusle and minus colors. As well, there are 3 screws that stick out of the central sphere, 2 below the eye that stick forward, and 1 that comes out of the top, pointed straight up. Overall, it's a very unconventional body plan. And then its evolution Magneton is 3 Magnemites stuck together. I'm not kidding, that's really what it is. Magneton is composed of 3 different Magnemite that have become linked in body and mind through strong magnetic forces. And I mean strong enough that it actually heats up the surrounding air and messes with electronics, which is one of the major issues with keeping these Pokemon. Plus, you would think that these guys would just weigh the same as 3 Magnemites put together, but no. A Magneton shoots way up in weight, now being 132 pounds and being 3 feet tall from top to bottom. And that's not the end of it. When Magneton is exposed to a special magnetic field that's given off by certain places, like Mount Coronet or Chargestone Cave in Unova, their molecular biology changes and they become a Magnezone. Magnezone greatly shifts the appearance of the line, now having one big body again that's shaped somewhat like the old tales of UFOs. It has a saucer-like body with one large red eye in the center, and two eyes on either side of its body situated on bulges that come out of the sides. They also have the signature horseshoe magnets under the two side eyes, as well as one in the back of the main body that looks a lot like a tail. Lastly, there's a yellow antenna that sticks up from the center of the top of the Pokemon, which many people claim that the Pokemon uses to receive and possibly send signals. In all, it's a very strange and odd Pokemon and a very strange and odd line, really deserving of being thought of as different than most biological Pokemon out there. But who knows? After we go through the guide, maybe you'll figure out that these strange beings are actually the perfect Pokemon partners for you. Enclosure. So the major issue that you need to consider with these guys is they're dangerous to keep around electronics. The magnets that are part of their bodies produce such massive amounts of electromagnetic radiation that anything that gets too close to them essentially gets fried, like you just set off an electromagnetic pulse. As well, they feed on electricity and local electromagnetic fields, so they will actively search out any major places where there's a lot of power and try to drain it dry. For that reason, these guys are oftentimes illegal to have near any large settlements outside of their Pokeballs. Only professionals like gym leaders, scientists with degrees, and people that have been specifically trained to handle these Pokemon and the energy they emit are able to get the needed paperwork to have these Pokemon near large population centers. Really, we should be thankful that Pokeballs are shielded from this kind of energy, or there wouldn't be any way for us to effectively control these guys. So if you are going to house these Pokemon outside of their Pokeballs like we've been doing in this series, you'll need to build them a place that, 1, is far away from any town or city, and 2, can contain all of the energy that these guys will be putting off. The best way to contain these guys and still meet their needs is to build them a building that will not only provide them with electrical power that they need, but will also shield the surrounding environment from them. To accommodate this, you'll be constructing a building consisting of 3 layers. The center of everything should be a layer of lead that's about an inch thick. This is the best material to absorb all the electromagnetism coming from these Pokemon. Then, because you don't want just a building built out of exposed lead, it needs to be encased on all sides by strong, thick concrete, at least a foot thick on all sides. This will stop your Pokemon from being able to damage the lead, while also keeping the lead from seeping into the surrounding environment. After all, nobody wants lead to suddenly start showing up in their groundwater. On one side of the building, you should have a thick metal door, lead core surrounded by stainless steel, to allow you access into the enclosure in case something needs to be fixed or one of the Pokemon has to be removed. Also, small porthole-like windows can be set into the sides of the building so that you can look in and see the Pokemon if you want. But the glass will need to be at least half an inch thick, and you will need metal shutters that cover the window when you aren't using them, as leaving the window open will just make the rest of the protections pointless. For the inside, you'll need a bit of lighting so that the Pokemon and you can see, meaning that you should install a recessed lighting that can be shielded from the Pokemon, as they'll try to suck the power out of them if they can get to them. And then you'll be installing 2 different kinds of lightning rod into the walls. One kind will be inactive, just grounded into the walls themselves and not tied into any power grid. This is to absorb any stray electricity that comes off of the Pokemon. You don't want any damage to come to the walls from any excess lightning that these guys give off, so the inactive lightning rods will act to redirect and harmlessly disperse that energy throughout the wall. The second kind of lightning rod is actually going to function as the opposite. These rods are going to be tied into some sort of electrical grid, meaning they're going to be powered and electrified. This means you do need to be careful around these ones. After all, I hear that being electrified doesn't really feel that great. But it also means that these can function as a feeding source for your Pokemon, providing your Magnemite evolution with the exposed power source that they need. As you clearly see, these guys don't really need the same things that many biological species would. Like, they don't have muscles that need to constantly be used or have to move around overly much. So they need less space than a biological Pokemon of comparable size and weight. That doesn't mean that they won't appreciate more space, but the minimum for a Magnemite is about 10 feet by 10 feet on the bottom and about 10 feet tall. Remember, these Pokemon float around, so vertical space is very important for them just as much as horizontal space. Magneton will need a bit more space thanks to its increased size, now needing its space to be a cube with 20 feet on all sides. And lastly, Magnezone doesn't need much more vertical space than Magneton, but it will need more space to simply move around, so you could keep the 20-foot high ceiling while expanding the walls to 30 by 30. That's a pretty good sized building, larger than some apartments in major cities. But keep in mind that it's a fully evolved Pokemon, and I always say that fully evolved Pokemon take a lot of room and a lot of resources. Lastly are the Pokemon that can be housed with them. The Pokemon of this line aren't that aggressive and tend to only fight when they're the ones that have been attacked first. So theoretically, anything that doesn't start a fight and can stand the electromagnetic field that they give off would be a good match. But it really depends on what can live in the room with them. We didn't exactly make this thing comfortable for most biological species. Perhaps some of the cave-dwelling steel types could stand it, like the Aeron line, but even then, it probably wouldn't be comfortable for them. Your best bet is to stick to other non-biological Pokemon, things like the Clink line or the Voltorb line. The last one is oftentimes found in the same place as Wild Magnemite, but they do tend to explode, so be careful there. And of course, other Magnemite evolutions are a yes. Just if you house multiple Magnemite together, then you should fully expect them to evolve into a Magneton eventually. Availability. As I'm sure you can tell about these guys, they don't really spend their time in forests or on the beach. No, they tend to congregate around places where there's a lot of electrical power flowing about. So places like the power plant in Kanto, the Verbank complex in Unova, and plenty of large cities like Humalau, Goldenrod, and Levincia. Really, anywhere there's a lot of people and a lot of power either being generated or used, then you should be able to find these guys. The only region that doesn't have a population of these guys for some reason is mainland Galar, but even then, they appear on the Isle of Armor, so And because of power drawing them in like a lure, they are very numerous in those areas. If you go to those areas, then you will very quickly find a Magnemite and even a Magneton. The only one of the evolutionary line that you might have some trouble finding would be Magnezone. Thanks to the fact that it needs a special magnetic field to even reach this evolution, the only places that you would find these guys are in places that have that magnetic field. These are places like Mount Cornet in Sinnoh, the vast Pony Canyon in Alola, Chargestone Cave in Unova, and, funny enough, the place where they built the power plant in Kalos. How's that for foreplanning? However, none of these places have a native Magnemite or Magneton population, meaning that the only way you could get a wild Magnezone is if the Magneton was transported there through some other means. Which is usually where I say that a breeder would be the only way that you could get that Pokemon, but there are no breeders for this Pokemon line. I mean, they have no gender, they have no reproductive ability, they aren't biological in any sense of the word. Trying to set up a breeding facility for them would be pointless. Really, the people that you want to get a hold of are professional trainers. Someone that you can hire to go out, catch the Pokemon you want, and then, if you want a Magnezone, they can take the Pokemon to that place for you to evolve it. Aside from that, you might be able to find collectors out there that might be willing to separate with one of their Pokemon, but either way, it's going to be a long, roundabout method of getting them. Catchability. I'm not going to say that they're difficult to catch, as if you prepare for them, then they should be a fairly simple catch. It's just that the preparation is a lot. One is that you need to find a way to protect yourself and any electronics you bring with you from the Pokemon. That means getting special containers for your phone, watch, car keys, anything that might get fried by being near these guys should be kept safely inside some kind of container made for that purpose. The only thing that you don't have to worry about are Pokeballs. As well, bring a Pokemon with the Lightning Rod ability. Electrike and Manectric are perfect for this. That way, if the Magnemite evolution decides to attack you, then it won't work. If you don't have access to that specific ability, then you're looking to bring either a Fighting type or a Fire type, as they'll be super effective against the Magnemite evolution. And because you want this encounter to be as short as possible, I'm going to recommend that you only bring Ultra Balls, even for just a Magnemite. Yes, they are more expensive, but it raises your chances of catching the Pokemon on the first throw. Getting these guys is all about how fast you can catch them. However, this is where I should mention that you are going to need a permit to have these guys. Due to the fact that they could easily cause issues with things like phones and emergency services, you'll have to take a test and get a permit to show that you can handle these Pokemon responsibly. That's why the people that usually have these Pokemon are people like engineers, electricians, scientists, and gym leaders. So before you even set out to catch one of these guys, be sure that you get the required paperwork to do so first. Care. I honestly don't have much to say here. This might be the shortest care section yet, and I can't imagine one being simpler. After all, you don't have to worry about feeding these guys. They feed on electricity, and that feeding method is built into their enclosure, so no daily food meals. Though, speaking of food, you should make sure that they will always have ready access to that electricity. I know there are plenty of places around the world that experience weather extreme enough to cause blackouts and power outages. Heck, back in Unova, we would sometimes get snowstorms that are rough enough to knock the power out for 3 or 4 days at a time. And those are the kind of storms that I'm talking about. If the power goes out for longer than a day, it could lead to your Pokemon running low on energy. This can lead to multiple effects, such as being unable to float, unable to produce any electricity of their own, being unable to communicate with each other or you, and possible injury if it goes on long enough. The best way to sidestep this whole situation is to have a backup power source that you can activate when the main power source is offline. Something along the lines of a generator that people usually get for these major weather situations that I mentioned. That way, even if your power is out for a long period of time, you won't have to worry about the Pokemon on top of everything else that you'll be worrying about in a time like that. Another thing that I want to talk about when it comes to the care for these guys is the fact that they're really friendly Pokemon. I know during the rest of this guide, I've kind of made these guys out to be terrible Pokemon that ruin electronics and can destroy electrical infrastructure, because they can, but it's important to understand that they don't do it out of malice. It's just how they are. It's like how you can't take a Slugma into a forest without starting a forest fire, or how a lot of the oceanic water types need water to survive. These guys are just unfortunate enough to need electricity in a world where we power our society with electricity. And by all accounts, when you actually spend time with these guys and get to know them and build a bond with them, then they are very friendly and loyal. The issue comes with how you build that bond. The normal method is to use food to build a bond between you and the Pokemon, but you can't hand feed electricity to these guys. That wouldn't end well for you. So for these guys, instead, you'll have to go much slower, and just try to get it used to you being there through exposure. Spend time inside the enclosure, without electronics, unless you want them fried, and just exist in the same space as your Pokemon for a while. Try getting closer to them, and if they allow that, then try to interact with them. Speak to them gently, pet their metallic shells, I guess. Try to be soft and approachable. The nice thing about Magnemite and Magneton is that they're not prone to aggression, so you don't have to worry about them zapping you unless you threaten and attack them first. Magnezone can be kinda finicky. It's the only one of the evolutionary line that's semi-territorial, So it might try to give you some kind of intimidation display to try and drive you off, but really, it's just like the rest of the line. As long as you don't make any aggressive moves towards it, then it should calm down with you being there over time. Then, once they allow you to touch them and handle them, a good thing that you can do to gain their trust is to polish them. These are our first steel types in the series, but a common thing for many of them is that polishing them with a metal polish can make them feel very good. It's kind of like massage oil to them. It will make them feel good, it'll make them look good, and it'll help that bond you're building grow. And the nice thing is, since steel types are immune to any kind of poison, you don't have to worry about the metal polish poisoning them. Once you've reached a level where the Pokemon are actively coming towards you and interacting with you, then you can start doing more, like giving them commands and start training them for battle, or for shows, or even just for more human interaction. From that point on, it's really up to you. And the last thing we should talk about when it comes to care for these guys is your own safety, as there are a few ways that you or the Pokemon could hurt you, whether by accident or not. One good example of this is someone that has metal inside their body, whether that be braces or fillings in your teeth, a metal body part like a hip, or possibly something along the lines of a pacemaker. The strong electromagnetism that these Pokemon give off and use to float could cause problems with these devices, even causing them to malfunction or heat up. So be aware that could be a problem if you have one of these things and you're looking at getting one of these Pokemon. The last thing you want is to have the enclosure perfectly set up, finally get your Pokemon, and then have your braces along with your teeth yanked right out of your mouth thanks to the strong magnetism. So always be aware of yourself and the abilities of these Pokemon, be they active or passive. Cost. Well, I could say the cost of the food would be nothing. After all, they don't eat berries or meat or anything that would be considered food to us. But that wouldn't be totally honest, now would it? They do feed just on electricity, which, unless you're able to produce your own through electric-type Pokemon or solar panels or something of the like, you have to pay for your electric. Meaning you will be paying for all the power usage that feeding these guys entails. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any exact numbers on how much that would be, as many different regions and cities charge at different rates, but from what I found, anywhere from the moderate to the high category is possible. The Pokemon itself can swing from really cheap to kind of expensive. It can be cheap if you decide to go out and catch one yourself, which is the main way that people get these things. So you could have one for the price of a Pokeball. But if you don't live near a space where they congregate, or the places are off limits in regard to power plants, then getting one through a professional trainer or even a collector could make the price shoot up to the moderate category or even the high category for the later evolutions. The enclosure is going to be the most expensive part of this as usual. The fact that you're going to need that much concrete to make the walls, plus all of the lead insulation, the lightning rods, and all of the electrical shielding, it'll easily drive this enclosure up to the very high category. And for the larger enclosures for the later evolutions, it'll be even further into the very high category. Conclusion. The way I see it, these guys are a mixed bag. On the one hand, they are so super friendly and easy to work with and get along with, and just taking their attitude and ease of training and care, I would say that they would make great beginner Pokemon. But then you have to take into consideration how they affect electronics, and how their variabiology can cause problems just by them being around. Plus, their enclosure isn't exactly beginner-friendly, so it's this strange dichotomy of wonderfully simple and dangerously complex. I would say that a professional should be the ones that are keeping these Pokemon. But as long as that professional is supervising and they're there to keep anyone else safe, then these could be the perfect Pokemon partner for anyone. Thank you all for listening, and please join us again next time when we cover the wild duck Pokemon Farfetch'd from the Kanto region. Have a wonderful night, everyone. Hello everyone, Carbon here, and I'm adding this addendum to the beginning of the video after I had already recorded the entire guide. Mostly because between the time of me recording it and now, I have suddenly jumped to over 100 subscribers. So, first of all, I want to say thank you to each and every one of you. That I can't tell you how much that means to me. I never thought that these guides would grow in such an explosive manner, and I very much appreciate each and every one of you for doing so, and all I can say is that I hope you continue to enjoy the guides, and hope that you continue to use them to care for your Pokemon, because that's really what this is all about, making sure the Pokemon are cared for properly. So, once again, thank you very much, and I am planning on doing something a little special within the next couple weeks for reaching 100 subscribers. So keep an eye out for that, and without further ado, let's get back into the Pokemon care guides. And so we go from one of the more exotic Pokemon biologically in the last guide to a super basic and ordinary one in this guide. I mean, this is even the first time we have a Pokemon that doesn't evolve, which is a rarity in the Pokemon world. Even the Galarian form of this Pokemon has an evolution, so the one we're going to be talking about today truly is an odd duck, pun intended. But that doesn't mean that these guys are boring or that they're bad Pokemon. In fact, it can add in a layer of simplicity and consistency that many people would enjoy. So Farfetch'd may be better than you think. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Pokemon Care Guides, where we go through how you would raise and care for different Pokemon species in your own home. This time, we'll be talking about the bird-like Pokemon Farfetch'd. Farfetch'd is actually pretty small, only being about 2.5 feet tall and weighing 33 pounds on average. It looks like your average bird Pokemon, with a brown-colored feathering along its back and face, and white or cream-colored feathers along its belly. It also has a pattern of black feathers on its face that seem to form almost an angry unibrow shape. Its eyes are large and brown, situated over a yellow beak. Its wings have evolved and adapted to function almost like hands, so they're better able to grab the well-renowned leek that these Pokemon carry around. Lastly, its feet are also yellow and are wide and webbed, allowing it good locomotion in and out of the water. Overall, not too complex of a body plan, especially for a Pokemon that's already fully evolved. So let's get into the guide and see if that simplicity translates into its care, and figure out if this is the perfect Pokemon partner for you. Enclosure. The nice part is that these Pokemon are native to temperate grasslands, meaning that they would do well if you just place them in your yard. So you should be able to just keep this Pokemon in your backyard. And unlike what its webbed feet seem to tell you, they actually don't need any water to swim in, so you don't have to worry about installing a water feature into your yard. Really, the best way to do it is to make sure you have a fenced area of grass that measures at least 50 square feet. That way they have enough room to move around, and the fence will help keep the majority of ground-based predators away from them. But remember, that's the minimum space they need, and if you are able to provide them with more, then they will gladly take it. They'll use this space to forage for things like weeds in your yard and small bug-type Pokemon, so you could decide to use them as a sort of pest control if you wanted to. Plus, it'll be able to provide your Pokemon with some very much appreciated exercise. However, this isn't the only space that you have to consider for them. You'll also need an indoor space that they can make use of to escape predators and bad weather. The size of this indoor space will change depending on if where you live gets cold during any part of the year. If you live in a place like Alola, where cold isn't really a thing, then your indoor space doesn't need to be much bigger than 20 square feet. Farfetch'd much prefer to be outside and will only really use this space to sleep and relax. But if you do have a more robust winter time where you live, then your Pokemon will be spending much more time indoors. In that case, the square footage of the indoor shelter should be the same as the minimum outside space, 50 square feet. As well, you should make sure that the shelter is much more insulated, to protect your Pokemon from the cold. As for construction, it can be made of any material you want, though I do recommend either treated wood or durable plastic. Aside from that, it can be a simple cube with 4 sides, a floor and a ceiling. On the inside of the shelter, you should be sure that it's made of, or at least lined with, a material that is easy to clean, as that's going to be a major part of the care section for this guide. And then, on top of that, you want to provide a soft bedding material that your Farfetch'd can use as a nest. This can be anything from soft hay, to sawdust, or even wood shavings, in addition to multiple kinds of leeks. Now, we're going to talk much more about the leek in the care section, but for now, know that this Pokemon will oftentimes use collected leeks as part of their nests. By providing them large amounts of them in their shelter, you will be helping your Pokemon to better settle in, especially if you have to keep them inside for the winter months. The last part of the shelter is going to be the door and how you get into it. The door should obviously be large enough for your Farfetch'd to fit through and provide them easy access inside and outside of the shelter. As well, you should have what's known as a guillotine door installed, which is a door that you can slide up and down out of place. This will 1. Protect your Pokemon from the elements, be that rain, wind, or the cold, and 2. It will help keep predators from making their way into the shelter and attacking your Pokemon. Farfetch'd, while they do put up a fight, are a well-known and widely hunted prey species from both humans and other Pokemon. And when it comes to you being able to get into the shelter yourself, for things like cleaning it, there are multiple ways that you can construct the shelter to make that possible. I've seen people make one wall on a hinge so that they can open the whole side of the shelter like a door. I've seen people have the roof open like a piano, that way they can just lean in and do what they need to do. And really, if you don't like those two, there are a lot of different options online that you can take inspiration from. The last part of this section of the guide is what Pokemon can be housed with them. Like I said, you have to be careful because these guys are a very popular prey item in the Pokemon world. Anything predatory or large enough will try to take a shot at them. You should also avoid small grass or bug-type Pokemon, as your Farfetch'd will try to make them a meal. However, anything herbivorous might try to take a bite out of the leek that Farfetch'd carries around with them, which will start a fight if they try. So nothing predatory, nothing herbivorous, nothing too small that your Farfetch'd might try to make a meal out of it, and nothing too territorial that'll start a fight. That leaves out a lot of Pokemon. Well, at least I can say they do well together, so long as they have enough leeks to go around. If you don't have enough of them, then they will start to viciously fight over the few that they have. But if you do give them enough so that every Farfetch'd is happy, then they should do well together. And always remember that the enclosure I lay out for you is only set for one Pokemon. You'll have to expand and adjust the enclosure as needed for each extra Pokemon you add in. Availability. I hate to say it, but there is very little wild population of these guys. Apparently they are very delicious when cooked, and thanks to the years of overhunting from both humans and other Pokemon, they are very near extinction in the wild. You will almost never see one in the wild. There are no wild populations in Paldea, Alola, Hoenn, and Kanto. Sinnoh is known to have the occasional boom in population near Pal Park on Route 221, but that's very rare. Same with Unova. Your best bet is to find one in Johto. They have managed to have a somewhat more robust wild population. Well, more robust than when you compare it to anywhere else. They only appear on the western coast of the region, near Olivine and Cianwood. And even when you're in those areas, they aren't common. Finding any kind of wild Farfetch'd will mean a lot of time and a lot of effort put into the endeavor. Thankfully, this is where I now have good news to tell you. Because of the endangered status of this Pokemon and the fact that they really are delicious, there has been a concerted effort by multiple governments, especially the Kanto government, to encourage breeders to raise them. Now, the end goal of this program is to increase the wild population of Farfetch'd to the point where it is stable. But that's not to say that you wouldn't be able to contact one of these breeders and be able to get your very own Farfetch'd from one of them. Many times they will work out a deal with you where you can raise and keep the Farfetch'd, but they may just borrow them every now and then for breeding and bringing in a new generation. However, I will say that if you go through one of these breeders, you will need to get the correct documentation. Not because they're dangerous, like Magnemite or Arbok, but because of their endangered classification, they want to be sure that any Pokemon they give to someone will be taken care of in the future, and make sure you're not just going to eat them once you get them. Catchability. Like I said, even finding one of these guys in the wild is going to give you a challenge. But if you do manage to find one, and you're prepared for it, then it shouldn't put up too much of a fight. After all, these aren't the strongest Pokemon out there, hence why they're so often prey. That doesn't mean they're defenseless, however. They are very adept at using that leek they carry as a weapon, to the point that certain combat professionals recognize that they develop certain styles. It's not just wild flailing on the Pokemon's part. So you will need Pokemon of decent strength, but not the strongest Pokemon ever. As well, I would recommend something that's stronger than a regular Pokeball, but an Ultra Ball might be going overboard. A Great Ball should do wonderfully for these guys. Care. Okay, let's talk about the leek first, since it's the most defining thing about this species. The leek is very important to these Pokemon both physically and psychologically. Physically, they use this leek to defend themselves from predators, using it much like a weapon or a sword. As I said before, it's even been proven that they develop their own styles through using the leek to defend themselves. And this is without training, so they have adapted as a species over the years to figure out how and know how to effectively use this leek in combat. In addition to that, in times where it's hard to find food in the wild, they'll actually use the leek as an emergency food source. Not to mention, they also use them in building their nests sometimes. And so, because of its usefulness and the species' dependence on it as a whole, they've developed a psychological need for that leek. For example, even if you have a newly hatched Farfetch'd, shortly after hatching, they will feel a need to have a leek in their hands. If they don't have one, then this can cause issues like anxiety, timidness, and even depression. So it is very important that you provide your Pokemon with at least a couple leeks to choose from. This way, they not only feel like they've picked the best one they can, but it then leaves the extras for things like snacks or for their nest. Though it's not just a one and done thing. Leeks are plants, so even if you give your Pokemon the freshest leek you possibly could, like you just pulled it out of the ground, they will still wilt and eventually go bad. When that happens, it's important for you to replace them as soon as possible, because the instant that Farfetch'd decides that the leek is either too weak for combat or too rotten to eat, they'll start to panic about finding a new one. Which brings us to food. To be perfectly honest, the food for this guy isn't going to be that much different from Psyduck. They will still need a mix of veggies with a bit of meat mixed in, but the details will shift a little when we take into consideration the difference in biology between Psyduck and Farfetch'd. For example, since it doesn't spend much, if any, time in the water, the meat in Farfetch'd's case will instead come from insects, small ones such as Nimble or Cutiefly, as the majority of the food is going to be consisting of veggies like lettuce, cucumber, and non-spicy peppers. You could also include leeks in the meal if you want to, as they do eat them in the wild when they're short on food, but since you're giving the leeks to them with other food, they'll most likely ignore eating them and either use them for their nest or they'll store them somewhere and then they'll just end up going bad. The one thing that you shouldn't feed them is bread. I know it's a trope that you feed Pokemon like Psyduck and Farfetch'd bread, but it's really not good for them. The way that we make bread means that it has a lot of sugars and starches, which can be bad for almost any Pokemon, but especially for Pokemon like Farfetch'd. Amount-wise for the veggies and the insects, you're looking at giving them about a pound of food a day, with a quarter of that being made of the insect meat. Put it in a large wide dish that will allow the Pokemon easy access, and put the food out twice a day, once in the morning and once at night. As well, don't forget to put out a water bowl for your Pokemon that's deep enough that they're able to get their beaks into it. Remember, they don't have lips, so to drink, they need to be able to get their beaks into the water and scoop it out. And now let's talk about the cleaning. Farfetch'd really end up making a mess wherever they live. They will molt feathers everywhere, the leeks will end up going bad eventually and starting to rot, and I'm gonna be perfectly honest, the waste is pretty bad. Thanks to how their biology works, their waste is very liquidy, and that means that it can tend to get everywhere. Combine that with the fact they aren't the cleanest eaters thanks to their beaks, and you'll have to clean up after them a lot. That's why I specifically mentioned that I would want to make the indoor enclosure out of something that could be cleaned pretty easily. You don't want to be fighting to get rid of certain stains. As well, you'll have to replace the bedding that's inside the indoor enclosure, and probably take a hose to the outside section just to make sure that it stays clean as well. And to top it all off, unfortunately, you'll be getting really good at doing all of this. Because these guys are so messy, you'll be doing all of this every 3 to 4 days. And the last thing we're going to talk about when it comes to the care for these guys is the training. And really, it won't be that much. Mostly, it's about them getting used to you and learning to be around you. These Pokemon are notorious for running from anyone they don't know, which when you first get them, will mean you. This is where the fencing in their area comes in handy. You'll be able to approach them and be in their area without them booking it in the other direction. This will give you the chance to try and calm them down and prove that you aren't a threat to them. Speak to them in a calming voice. Don't make any aggressive or sudden moves. Slowly, the Pokemon will get acclimated to you and should at least stop trying to run away at first sight. It will also help if you herd them back into their pen at night. This will double between showing them that you mean them no harm, while also avoiding any predators like Vulpix or Thievals from getting to them. When you do this, you'll want to use something like a long pole or a stick to gently nudge them in the right direction. This will help them get into the habit of going into their enclosure late at night on their own, and they'll understand that you aren't a danger to them. At that point, when they recognize you more as friend than threat, you can move on to hand feeding them. When you come out with their food for either meal, try placing the food in your hand and offering it to the Pokemon. Kneel down and make sure to keep your hand flat because it will hurt if they accidentally bite your fingers. It may take a few tries, and if they don't take the food from you after about 20 minutes, then put the food back in their bowl and try again with the next feeding. Eventually, they will start to hesitantly take the food from your hand. Let them just eat from your hand for a few sessions just to get used to how that feels. And then, when you're certain they won't freak out and try to run away, slowly try to pet their head and neck. They may shy away from it at first, but by this point in the training, they should trust you enough not to run. From here, it's just repetition. When they get used to the neck and head petting, then move on to their back and wings, though be careful not to touch their leek. They will still freak out about that. And really, at this point, your training is done. If you're strong enough, you could move on to trying to teach the Pokemon to be comfortable being picked up, but that's not needed, and these Pokemon can get kind of big to carry around. And that's really it. Like I promised in the intro, simplicity is the name of the game with these guys. Care. Since the food is going to consist of mostly stuff that you can find in the grocery store, the cost per month is going to be in the moderate category, and that's just because of how much they eat and because we have to factor in the insects as well. In all, not that bad. The enclosure won't be too bad either. Even if you decide to build it yourself instead of buying one, you won't have to spend more than the low or possibly the moderate category on it. Being able to allow these guys to just wander in your yard really brings the price of your enclosure down. Which makes me sad to say that the Pokemon is where you're going to need to spend a lot of money. Thanks to the fact that they're nearly endangered, and you have to get certified and vetted to have one of these Pokemon, you will need to spend quite a bit of money to have one. In total, I think you're looking at the high, maybe even the very high category trying to get one. Conclusion. Well, I promised simplicity, and I think that I delivered. After all, this is a Pokemon that you pretty much only have to feed, make sure it doesn't get eaten by anything else, and give it its favorite veggie every now and then to hold on to. Aside from that, the enclosure is really easy to set up, the training is the most basic stuff that you could be doing, and the food is something that you can just pick up at the grocery store when you go there to get your own stuff. Really, the only downside that I see to these guys is their rarity. Thanks to that endangered status, it's going to be very tough for a beginner keeper to prove themselves and be able to get the documentation to get this Pokemon, despite how easy they are to care for. Oh, and the cleaning is a lot, especially for a non-poison type Pokemon. If it weren't for those two things, then I would say that for anyone, beginner and experienced keepers alike, that these could easily be the perfect Pokemon partner for them. Thank you all for listening, and please join us again next time when we go over the swift-footed Pokemon Doduo and its evolution Dodrio. Have a wonderful night, everyone. When you hear of the flying type, you always tend to think of Pokemon that soar through the skies. I mean, the type is even called the flying type, and let's be honest here, the vast majority of these Pokemon look a lot like birds. And even for those of them that don't look like birds, they have massive wings that propel them through the air like Dragonite and Noivern. But that's not always the case. I mean, we just talked about Farfetch'd, who's a flying type, and it barely ever leaves the ground. So, because of these ground-locked flying types, I've started to try and think of the type as Pokemon that can either take to the air, or that are very fast, so as to almost look and feel like they're flying. And that second category is where we find our topic today. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Pokemon Care Guides, where we go through how you would raise and care for different Pokemon species in your own home. Today, we'll be talking about the multi-headed Pokemon Doduo and its evolution Dodrio. Doduo has a very simple body plan. It's got a round central body covered in brown feathers. From there, it has 2 long spindly legs ending in feet with 4 wide-placed toes. On top of the body, 2 thin necks lead to the heads that are pretty much the same as the body, small spheres with brown feathering. Each head has 2 large black eyes and a thin beak. With this unique physique, Doduo stands at about 4 feet 7 inches tall and weighing about 86.5 pounds. And evolving doesn't change the basic body plan of this Pokemon, though it does add on to it. Dodrio now has 3 heads instead of 2, and each head has a crest made of long black feathers. As well, the main body now has an undercoat of black feathers near the legs and a wide set of reddish tail feathers. It's also taller now, standing an average of 5'11". And all this extra size, and extra body parts, mean that Dodrio now weighs around 188 pounds. In all, it's very easy to see that these guys are built for speed, and that is going to be reflected in their enclosure. So, for those of you that like having a quick-footed Pokemon, let's get into it and see if these guys are the perfect Pokemon partners for you. Enclosure. There are 2 main things to consider when we build an enclosure for these guys: space to run and social dynamics. Even just by looking at them, you can tell these guys are built to run. No wings, long, strong legs, and doduo is even kind of streamlined with the tail feathers and crest feathers. So they need wide open space, almost like the Rapidash line. As well, these Pokemon are very social with each other. In the wild, they travel in groups of 2 to about 20. If you don't have more than one of these guys, then it can lead to health problems like anxiety, nervousness, and depression. Meaning that if you want to keep these guys, you will need a minimum of at least 2 birds. You can keep any gender together, but it is more recommended that you have a male and a female. Males may get aggressive with each other, especially during breeding season. Females might also get aggressive with each other, but not to the level of the males. And just be aware that if you do have a male and a female, you may end up with chicks at some point. Anyway, both of these things together mean that you will need a good amount of space for these guys. If you're sticking with the minimum of 2 Pokemon, then you're looking at an enclosure of 80 feet by 250 feet. Now, I know that seems like a lot of space, but these guys need all that room to run around. And you do need to have one side be much longer than the other, which acts almost like a runway or a racing strip for them to get some good exercise in. And like I said, make sure that the entire enclosure is just a flat field. With them moving at such high speeds, any divots in the ground or excessive obstacles like trees and rocks could be dangerous to them if they hit them at high speeds. When it comes to fencing, you'll want to be sure that you have 2 layers of it. This is a safety measure. That way, in case there's a break in the inner fence or they manage to get through it, they won't be loose. They'll still be in a fence. The fencing should be some high tension, high visibility wire. They shouldn't be strong enough to break through it if you get the right stuff. Just be sure that whatever kind you buy, the netting is small enough that their legs and their beaks can't get caught in it. Along the fence, every 10 or 12 feet or so, you should have a wooden support pole. That way you can add a ton of support to the wire. You also want it to be the high visibility stuff, that way they won't just crash into it while running at top speed. Along the base of the fencing, you should line the ground about 6 inches out from either side with gravel. This will stop plants and weeds from growing along your fence, which just makes your life easier, but it will also keep the ground from being worn down, as the doduo line, when kept in an enclosure like this, are well known to pace the fence line, which over time could cause a rut to form and the ground to shift. The last part of the fencing is that you'll need a gate so you can get in and out of the enclosure. Well, you'll need 2 gates, one for each layer of the fencing. Again, this is a safety measure, so if they try to squeeze past you through the first gate, they're still stuck in the second layer of fencing. A few final details regarding the outside enclosure. You should be sure that the field has good drainage to it. You don't want water to build up in the pen, as the feathers for these guys have little to no waterproofing. Mud is also very slick, and if these guys hit a patch of it at top speed, then there's a good chance of them sliding and possibly hurting themselves. As well, they like to take dust baths, where they roll around in a dry dirt patch, and they can't do that if the ground is too wet. Aside from the outdoor enclosure, you'll also want to give them an indoor shelter where they can go to avoid inclement weather. Like I mentioned, these Pokemon don't have a thick coating of feathers, and the feathers they do have are not very water repellent or cold insulating. That's why these Pokemon don't do well in very wet or very cold places. If you do live in a place that gets that way a part of the year, then you might be able to house them indoors for that entire season, but the dimensions of the building to do so are so impractical as to be impossible outside zoos and major organizations. So instead, we're going to simply make these holding pens that they can stay in for short periods of time. Unfortunately, that does mean that you won't be able to really keep these Pokemon in any environment that gets too cold or too stormy, but that's an unfortunate side effect of these Pokemon. You're not going to be able to keep everything everywhere, unfortunately. The pens for these guys should be at least 20 feet squared per Pokemon. You need to make sure they have some good air ventilation as well, and plenty of natural daylight for at least 8 hours out of the day. So I would recommend installing some vents and windows that'll let in some sunlight and fresh air, as well as some actual fluorescent lights for when it gets darker out. Of course, it does need to be heated on the inside, and you're going to want to build it out of material that is very easily cleaned. If these Pokemon are going to be housed here, then they're most likely going to be making a mess here. And when I say being housed in here, I don't mean that they'll be sleeping in here at night. They are very comfortable sleeping outside, and so long as the temperatures don't get too low during the night, they should be fine. Normally, I wouldn't recommend this because of predators, but unless you live somewhere with natural populations of Pyroars or Lipards, then there isn't any danger to them. If you do end up living in those places, then you could keep them inside their pens for the night, but you should increase the size of the pen to 30 feet squared per Pokemon, and be sure to let them out as soon as you get up in the morning. The more time they spend outside, the better. Lastly, there aren't that many Pokemon that can be housed with these guys. While they are very social with each other, to the point of needing another doduo evolution in the same enclosure with them, they really only do well with other grazing Pokemon. A few good examples of this are the Girafarig line and the Blitzo line. The Girafarig line are more often than not very docile and friendly towards people and other Pokemon. The only thing with them is that you will need to be careful with Girafarig's tail, as it's not very bright, and if it senses something that's behind it, then the tail head's going to lash out. If this attack from the tail catches a Doduo or a Dodrio unaware, then it could lead to injury, so be aware of that if you decide to house them together. The Blitzo line could be okay, but it is very well known that the whole line tends to have a temper to it. So if you do plan on introducing them to each other and eventually keeping them in the same enclosure, introduce them to each other slowly, and be sure to get them used to each other first before fully letting them integrate. Especially any Zebstrika that you end up getting. Also, during nesting season, the Doduo line can get kinda testy, so it might also be best to separate them out during that time, especially if you have an egg that they're caring for. And as always, remember that the enclosure that I described earlier is really only designed for the Pokemon that I specified. If you plan on adding any more of this line, or other lines altogether, then be sure to alter and adjust the enclosure accordingly so all Pokemon are happy and cared for. Availability. The thing is that these guys aren't really that common in the wild. For the most part, they tend to stick around the western side of the Kanto region, and I guess technically the eastern side of the Johto region? The Indigo Plateau. They surround the Indigo Plateau, along with underneath and alongside the cycling road between Celadon and Fuchsia City. Also, these are very common Pokemon to stock in Safari Zones. They're in the one in Kanto, Johto, Hoenn, and Kalos. There are records of them sporadically appearing on Route 201 in Sinnoh and Route 12 in Unova, but again, it's very sporadic, and when there aren't those explosions in population, they are nearly impossible to find there. So really, the best thing to do is to get to one of the Safari Zones. They're very regulated, it feels like you're out in the woods hunting, but it's totally safe, and if anything goes wrong, there are rangers there to get you out of the situation. Now, if that's not really your thing, then there are ways that you can get one of these Pokemon from someone else. There aren't really breeders for these Pokemon. Well, I guess technically there are, but they're farmers. They raise these Pokemon, breed them, then sell the meat, eggs, and bones for treats for other Pokemon. I'm sure that if you call one of them, explain what you want, then they may be willing to give you a couple of eggs or even some freshly hatched Doduo. I can't guarantee that they'll go along with it, after all these Pokemon are how they run their livelihoods, but if they don't, then you can always find another farm and try them. It's going to be a lot of work, but you should eventually be able to find someone that's willing to sell you some Pokemon. Catchability. A big thing for catching these guys is how fast they are. It's the same issue with the Ponyta line. You have to be able to catch up to them to be able to catch them. So either you have to be able to catch them at full speed, which can be dangerous, or you have to get the drop on them. And good luck with that. Thanks to the extra heads, they always have one on lookout, even when the other heads are asleep. You need to be highly stealthy to be able to sneak up on them. But if you're able to get close enough to throw a ball at one of them, then a Pokeball or a Great Ball would be best for doduo, and for dodrio, absolutely go with an Ultra Ball. A fastball could be effective against a dodrio, as they are pretty speedy, but I'm not sure how effective they are compared to an Ultra Ball, so that's something you guys will have to take into consideration yourselves. Care. Alright, so I know they haven't really played a factor in the guide so far, but now is when we have to start thinking about the multiple heads thing. Really, it's mostly a concern for dodrio, as both of doduo's heads tend to get along. But there are the odd case of two doduo heads not getting along, so while I will be mostly talking about this stuff in regards to dodrio, any of the techniques that I mentioned could be used for doduo as well. So the major issue with the three heads is the fact that instead of getting along like its pre-evolution does, they each have their own developed personalities and thought patterns, and like anyone that has to be stuck in an enclosed space with their siblings for a long period of time, they're going to fight with each other. This is the most prevalent when it comes to food. Speaking of which, when it comes to feeding these guys, you want to make it a good mix of leafy greens like spinach, lettuce, and cabbage. You should also add in a small amount of fruit and a bit of insect meat as well. Not too much. I would say that the majority of the meal should be reserved for the veggies, with only about a quarter of the meal being a mix of fruit and meat. For a doduo, you'll need about 3 pounds of food a day, and up that to 5 pounds a day for a dodrio. This should be split into 2 meals throughout the day, one in the morning and one at night. But you will also need to split each meal into equal portions for each head. It's not a necessity as they all share the same stomach, but each head does enjoy the feeling of getting a meal, so it's recommended that you do it. And you will definitely know when these guys get hungry. Not so much for a doduo, but for a dodrio, the heads will start to fight with each other if they get hungry. When you see this, it's best to feed them their meal right then, or at least give them some snacks to tide them over until mealtime. Because if the heads really start fighting with each other, then it could lead to some problems. Those beaks are sharp, and if turned on each other in such close proximity, they can be very damaging. Which I think is a good segue into what kind of training you'll have to do with these guys. The most I'm going to get into in this guide is getting the Pokemon used to you being around them and comfortable with your presence. But there are certainly people out there that have worked with these Pokemon well enough that they can get them to do tricks and even ride them around, though I can't imagine that it's as comfortable as riding a Mudsdale or a Rapidash. If you want to, you could go that far, but you have to go to someone who knows much more about these Pokemon than I do. As for right now, we'll begin with how you should approach these Pokemon. One major thing to keep in mind whenever you approach these Pokemon is that you have to be able to recognize when they're on high alert. If they have all of their heads up and looking around, then it might be best not to go near them right then. It means that they're looking around for threats and they don't feel safe at the moment. If you approach them when they're like this, especially when you're still new to them, they may get spooked and attack you. Just to avoid even the possibility of that, it's best for you to wait until they're in a less stressed, less alert state. When that happens, you need to be sure to approach them in a confident and sure manner. Don't rush or make any sudden moves, but they will be able to sense any fear or anxiety in you, and at that point, they won't respect you enough to let you near them. So confidence, strength, self-assuredness. Arceus, I sound like a motivational speaker, but it's honestly a necessity whenever you approach these Pokemon. Once you get near them with that confident swagger in your steps, you want to start by showing them you have treats for them. The best thing to use for these treats are either bits of veggies or bits of fruit. You could use insect meat, I guess, but due to the limited amount of it in their diet, it could be a bit much using it in both treats and in meals. So I would recommend just sticking with the veggies. Using these treats, start by simply throwing one of their feet from about 5 or so feet away. This will pull double duty, showing them that you are the one that brings the food, and that you're the one to be trusted, that you aren't there to hurt them. Do this a few times, and then try to get closer. They may still be slightly skittish towards you, and if that's the case, then simply keep giving them snacks from a distance and try again at a later date. If they do allow you to approach, then your next goal is to get them comfortable with you touching them and petting them. Again, we're just going to keep rewarding them with food, reinforcing that calm, good behavior while you're touching them. When you do this, I would recommend that you wear protective gear in the beginning. Their beaks are sharp, as I've mentioned before, and especially with doduo, one head might like you when another head doesn't. You can't get complacent just because the one head is really well behaved. Only when you've been working with the Pokemon for a while and you're sure that all the heads are more likely to listen to you than to go after you, then you remove the protective gear. And that's really it. Like I said, this is really just basic get to know your Pokemon stuff. Things that these farmers that have large flocks of these Pokemon do. If you want to do something more intense with them than that, you'll need to get in contact with someone who knows more about them. Lastly, we're just going to talk about a few minor tips and tricks for these Pokemon. Like the fact that these Pokemon have a dominant head that controls the body. Look for the head that has the thickest neck and seems to be in charge of the other heads. It may take a bit of watching to notice, but eventually you should see that one head seems to be more in sync with the body's movements than any of the others. And this goes for doduo as well as dodrio. Recognizing which head is in charge of the body can help you in the training by allowing you to try and predict what the body's going to do, so you don't get spooked if they suddenly take off on you during training. When you do get one of these Pokemon, there is a slight benefit to getting a farm-raised one. When these Pokemon hatch, many farmers allow them to imprint on them. This not only makes them easier for the farmers to train, but it also makes them much friendlier to people in general. So that is a bit of a benefit to getting a farm-raised one if you're thinking about going that way. Cost. The enclosure for these guys is going to put you in the very high category. Because of the sheer size of the enclosure, the fencing alone will cost you a ton. Yes, it is the wire fencing, which is cheaper than your normal picket fence, but just the sheer amount is going to be a lot. Combine that with the holding pens and the gravel you'll need along the fencing, and you're looking at a lot of money. Food will be the cheapest thanks to the fact that it really is just stuff that you can get at the grocery store. Well, maybe not the insect meat, but you understand what I mean. Really, the only thing that's going to make the price go up is the amount. 3 to 5 pounds of food a day is no joke, and the fact that you have to have at least 2 of these Pokemon means that it's going to put you in the high category at least. And the Pokemon is no different than the rest of this. And again, because you need more than one. These Pokemon are not common, and the farmers that raise them use them as their livelihoods. To get some of these Pokemon from any of those farmers, you're going to have to reimburse them for any money that they're losing by giving you that Pokemon. So getting 2 is going to put you in the very high category. Only way around that is to go catch your own, which I'm not sure if that's a good idea. Conclusion. These really seem like Pokemon that are designed for farmers. I mean, they need a bunch of space, you have to have multiples of them, and unless you're going into some real fancy training, you don't need to work with them a lot. If you're a farmer, then I can see these being a great Pokemon for you to raise and sell and make your living off. For the casual keeper though, then they aren't that great. The space and numbers that make them great for the farmers make them a bit of a pain to keep for the average person. But they are easy Pokemon to tame, and their diet is very simple. They are far from the most complex Pokemon that we've covered in these guides, so if you have the space for them, then these could easily be the perfect Pokemon partners for you. Thank you all for listening, and please join us again next time when we talk about the cute aquatic ice type Seal and its evolution Dugong. Have a wonderful night, everyone.